Hello and welcome to the Sociology Staffroom. I've got a big smile on my face because we've got Dr. Emma Cooke with us from Kent University. I am really excited because it's a real life sociologist, which is really important to not only me, but obviously for sociology teachers. I think we look and read lots of research, and then actually to speak to someone who is human, who is also
Absolutely.
not I don't know, 100, and an old white male. Nothing against it, but a lot of sociology, as you know, is predominantly that. And also, your
Yeah,
research is so contemporary. So I'm so grateful for you spending some of your time. I know you lectured this morning. Feel very
absolutely.
grateful to have you here. So thank you, first of all, for joining me this morning.
No, that's I'm really, really happy to be here. And when the opportunity came up, I was like, yeah, absolutely. It's just really nice to also, yeah, let you guys into my world as well. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Some sort of mutual respect there. So, right,
Absolutely.
I've got lots of questions for you because sociology is about asking those questions, aren't they?
Mhm.
But first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself because although you're criminologist, you've got a sociology background. There's a whole lot there. So tell me a little bit about yourself and what brought you also into lecturing as well. A little bit of a history of yourself.
Yeah, of course. So I kind of, as you do, I was at school. I was doing my A levels. I did English, Spanish, and history, and I really wanted to go into law. That I was just set in stone. I was like, I'm going to go into law. Barristers earn loads of money, which I'll come on to later, I'm sure, during this podcast, is not always the way. But this pressure to kind of go into law, my parents did law, this pressure to go to university and all these different kinds of things. So I didn't really have any other idea other than that. A levels didn't go quite to plan, which again was something really weird to me because I'd always just been quite successful. Um, and so all of a sudden I was faced with this challenge, which actually I love sharing now because lots of my students think that there's so much pressure in life to do this and that, but actually curveballs are thrown your way. So actually this curveball that was thrown my way of not getting those grades to do law actually was the start of my journey to where I am today. So I went through clearing, which again is a very stressful process. I'm sure a lot of people can recognize that. And actually, I'm now on the clearing hotlines at the University of Kent. So it's kind of a weird turn of events. And I found a course, Sociology and Criminology, at the University of Kent, where I am now. And I just thought, you know what? Crime, criminology. I'd never studied social sciences to that point. I wanted to be a criminal lawyer, and so the element of crime and criminology attracted me. And all my other friends were going to uni, so I just thought I'm going to do it. And that really opened up the door to where I am today. Um, there were kind of subjects that weren't really offered at the time at my school. And actually, it just really led me to begin to think about things differently. So, less so in a black and white way as the written law and constitutions, are laid out, but more so in the sense that there's a lot kind of more to these issues, and we can look at things through a much deeper lens. And so I did the undergraduate in criminology and sociology. I then did a master's because I didn't want to leave the university. It goes so quickly, it was a massive whirlwind, and I really kind of had an appetite for the subject. My master's, I was really lucky. I got funding to go to New York, and I worked alongside public defense lawyers, which is where my research interest um, began, which I'll go on to in a bit. Um, so I spent a lot of time in New York in law centres, working with public defense lawyers, the more kind of the criminal justice side of things. And again, that just sparked my appetite even more so as I progressed through my degrees. You kind of go into things a little bit more deeper, you have to be a little bit more critical. And I'll be honest, I didn't really know what I wanted to do at this point. I knew I had the subject interest. I liked the university life, as you do. Um, but more than that, yeah, there was something about it that made me want to continue what I was doing. So then when my supervisor suggested to apply for a PhD, I was like, oh no, definitely not. I can't do that. Like it's a massive feat that I wouldn't be able to do that. But actually, I then applied with his help, which I'm very, very grateful for. And got funding to do a PhD, and yeah, taught alongside that, began the lecturing journey, loved doing it, and I'm still at the same university. What are we now? 14 years later, having done all of those things at the same university and now being on the other side. And yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to have both studied criminology and sociology here and now to be teaching kind of the journey that I've been through is something that inspires me daily. So yeah, that's my kind of story. It wasn't really straightforward. It wasn't really planned. But yeah, the subject grabbed me, and here I am.
Oh, that's so. I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, I was so interesting. I think it's important for us to say that to our students of the story you said, which is
Yeah,
the idea that you came from a languages background, really,
yeah,
into a sociology which you've never taken before, and then that sort of segue. And I think sometimes we, as teachers, whether that be at GCSE level or A level, we get very caught up. It's very easy to get caught up in the sort of the exam procedure and that
absolutely. Yeah,
pressure. But then just
yes,
to trust in the system and that sort of internal desire for students, I think, there's all that external pressure, but actually, if they're not, like you using your words, grabbed by the subject,
yeah,
ultimately you've got to be trusting that, and that it doesn't
hmm,
matter how much pressure happens externally. It's more than just that; it's that love for that subject,
yeah,
which you clearly have, and obviously you're doing a fantastic job lecturing at the University of Kent and passing that passion on to those students, which is so powerful.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah. And there's two things I will want to pick up on that in a minute, more the
hmm,
pragmatic stuff, which is obviously you mentioned about the clearing hotline and
yeah,
also, preparing our students for university. But I might pick that up towards the end. Yeah, so I really want to ask about your research on legal aid, because obviously the way we currently teach it in sociology is that the criminal justice system works on behalf of the ruling class, and it's that sort of narrative generally we take, particularly in regards to sort of the legal system. And then obviously we do talk about sort of like bringing social cohesion from a functionist perspective, but I understand your research has found something different. So tell us more about your research and yeah, what you found.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, well, first of all, I think legal aid is a really interesting field. I think lots of people aren't aware what it is, what it does, why we have it, when actually it is kind of very much a pillar of our welfare state. So I think, first of all, that's a massive misconception. And my research really kind of wanted to address that and begin to bring to light what legal aid is. Um, yeah, my research really spans all different areas of legal aid. So I spent hours in police stations, solicitors' offices, courtrooms, all these different kinds of places, law centres, charities, to try and understand what it is that legal aid is, how it functions, and also what it contributes to society. So, as you said, in some respect, there is a functionist element. There's this kind of class element, and this idea that we have a two-tier legal system in society. So that being that you can either afford a really good lawyer and take yourself through the justice system, or you can't afford a lawyer and therefore you apply for legal aid, which was supposedly implemented to allow justice for all, right? It was put in as a mechanism to allow for those who can't otherwise afford legal representation to be able to access a lawyer when in need. But the realities of that are quite different. So we read all the headlines, you read all the news stories whereby it says lack of legal aid or cuts to legal aid, or all these negative headlines. And actually, I'd love to sit here and say that that isn't reality. But the reality is legal aid is diminishing. It's being cut. It's being reduced. And whilst we have this benefit and it's meant to be justice for all, that's not quite the reality. So breaking down that and kind of dismantling these misconceptions we have of legal aid has been a really important part of my work. So in my book, it's called The Hidden World of the Legal Aid Lawyer, but the second part of that is revealing the heart of justice. And I think it really is the heart of justice, because more of us need legal aid than we imagine. So it's not all kind of the extreme ends of society in terms of social class, whereby you're either really, really rich and really well off and you've got the best lawyer you can ever have and all these kinds of things, or you're kind of street homeless, unable to get other welfare resources. Actually, there's a massive proportion of people in between who also require legal aid. And unfortunately, the media stereotypes and the media amplification of headlines such as fat cat lawyers and lawyers helping the poor unnecessarily and lawyers helping the undeserving are all undermining the very meaning of legal aid. So, yeah, my research has not only revealed the realities a little bit more, which I think is so important to break down those stereotypes, it has revealed a little bit of a class basis, as you kind of mentioned initially, but it's less kind of opposite in terms of the upper and lower ends of the legal systems. There's much more to it. But also, more importantly, my research reveals the realities of working within that kind of difficult environment, I guess, this environment whereby you're being, shot down at all angles. Funding, austerity, news, the public, the stereotypes. How and why do people continue to work in that when all we read is negative press and judgment? So it's really that. It's, as I said, it's revealing the heart of justice, and a heart that's often very much hidden and overlooked by everyone else, really.
Yeah, because you sort of said that, like, in the idea that these sort of professionals are sort of like undermined from all sectors of society, really. Potentially, as you said, the media, but also potentially colleagues as well. And I've been reflecting on this quite a bit and thinking about, how, even clients themselves might think, oh, I've just got legal aid, or, people, other professionals might be thinking, oh, the person that works in legal aid is like a failed lawyer or something. And actually that's media perception. So I suppose I've got two questions that come out of that. Why is there that stigmatisation of legal aid, even by those people that use it? And then secondly, I suppose my second question that comes off that is, why do they keep on still doing that? Like, why are they still, I know you mentioned the heart of justice, but what does that actually mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the stereotypes of legal aid, as I said, it's a combination. And I think largely, I mean, I know I've mentioned the media a lot, and I've mentioned politics and funding and all these different kinds of things, and also power dynamics in terms of we've got this kind of contrast whereby we have a lot of kind of crown courts are very grand, and you've got these courtrooms, and in the media particularly, it's shown to be a very like regal space whereby you have all these different individuals sitting in different positions of power, and you've got the gowns and the wigs and the lawyers swarm in, swarm out, and all these different elements to the courtroom. But that's not quite the reality. So I think the reason why we have these stereotypes is because of lack of understanding and lack of education on what it is and what the court system actually looks like. But also in the past, maybe there have been a few kind of miscarriages of justice and abuses of services which haven't necessarily shone a good light on legal aid naturally. But also I think that these kind of narratives and these, well, as I'd say, toxic narratives have kind of led us to believe that it is for those who otherwise aren't entitled to anything else in society. So it's this kind of like damning approach on certain groups of people. And typically when you speak to people, it's like legal aid is only for the underclass, these individuals that can't work, can't get a job, don't have access to housing, and now they want legal services. So it's this kind of judgment in that sense. And I think the stereotypes are really kind of difficult as well. As you said, in terms of legal education at university level, you get only probably one or two maximum legal aid modules, right? So when you're studying this kind of commercial route, this going into the private sector and earning big bucks and all these kinds of things is very much fueling legal education. So what that means is lots of people who want to go into legal aid or maybe haven't heard of it don't get the same access to these kind of modules that are going to help them going forward. You also hear about like the low starting salaries and all these different kinds of things. So stereotypes there isn't just one source. Unfortunately, it's kind of the media, politics, education, clients largely because lots of people blame the lower classes for other problems surrounding welfare. So, it's this kind of stereotyping, these moral panics of certain groups and individuals in society create more problems for society. So that's naturally, it's the labeling we get in news stories and stuff. Um, so yeah, the stereotypes exist for a number of reasons, but they're just perpetuated as time goes on, which absolutely acts as a barrier for both the worker and the client. Sorry, guys, if anyone can hear any random noises in the background, I do have a 1-year-old puppy, and he's now decided to use this time to roll on his back and do whatever. So apologies if you can hear. Um, yeah, so the stereotypes exist. And in terms of, sorry, just remind me the second part. I've gone on about stereotypes because I'm so passionate, and now I'm like, what was that second part?
No, yeah. So yeah, God, it's from so many things, and I didn't realise that the modules were. I thought there might be a bit more balance. Like this is, or even like refining it in the third year, so
Yeah,
that the students. I thought you'd get more of a, because obviously I've never taken a law degree, so I'd be thinking, and by doing that, by virtue of the course being more leaning to corporate law, I assume, or sort of business law as
yeah,
such, then actually it devalues the legal aid element if it's only 2 modules, because I sort of wrongly assumed that you sort of specialise maybe in your last year. But
yeah,
I think, why then still do it? You mentioned Heart of
yeah.
Justice, but with all those stigmatisation that is going on from a variety of sources, what keeps those members of the legal profession keep on at doing legal aid?
Absolutely. So, emergent from my research, so it started in my undergraduate dissertation. I did a very mini case study of a local solicitors firm. In my master's degree, I then, as I probably mentioned earlier, in my master's degree, I went to the US, worked with public defense lawyers, and got another sort of case study and insight into that in a different context. Um, and then doing the PhD and spending sort of a year in the field, as I said, in different places whereby legal aid is used, understanding that glue that holds it all together was so important. And that was a big part of my research. So, one of the differences between my research and my projects, as opposed to other existing academic literature on legal aid, is that I decided to take a holistic approach. So rather than just focusing on criminal law or family law or social welfare, I've done kind of an holistic view whereby I've looked at all different specialisms in one, because I wanted to understand what it was, despite specialism, given that legal aid is sort of grouped as a whole anyway. What is it that holds it together? And it really is that kind of altruistic idea of giving back, making change, this kind of charitable nature of lawyering. That really is kind of what drives the work at the moment. So I identified what I've called a shared orientation, which exists within the legal aid field. So it's a bit like a working culture, but it's maybe not as rigid as, for example, a policing working culture, which has very distinct and defined ways of being and behaving. And that reason being, legal aid lawyering still does have the different specialisms, different workplaces. It spans different locations. It can be a large firm, it can be a small firm. You can be half legal aid, half private work. So having a strict working culture didn't quite fit to that. So I identified the shared orientation, whereby it's a shared way of being, in another way to kind of put things. So it's you have the same motivations, you sort of have similar skill sets that make you a good fit for that kind of work. Socialization practices, knowledge sharing, all different elements come from that. And this shared orientation I've kind of defined as the cohesive, the glue that's keeping everyone afloat. Because when there's no other support on the macro level from the government, from money, even from your private counterparts, the people that are going to keep you going are those who are in the same boat with you, right? So it's shared orientation. And that's really, yeah, that's what keeps people going. Also, in a kind of another recent piece of work that I did, I've identified legal aid work as distinctive from private legal work. So quite often you hear of lawyering as one of our key professions, right? And when you work in a profession, you get good pay, good rights, workers' rights, protection, the ability to climb the ladder, salary increases. And all of those things are not necessarily conducive to legal aid work. So in the work that I've done recently, identified that, privately funded legal work is very much maintaining that professional identity, but actually legal aid, because you have to live it, breathe it, and do everything else within that, is much more of a vocation. So that's very much kind of what I've said. So private work, profession, legal aid work, much more of a vocation. And I think that's really important. You have to live it, breathe it, love it, want to help everyone, and have that altruistic, charitable nature, because otherwise what else is going to get you through? Absolutely.
Definitely. So interesting, because I think it's so important for us sociology teachers to hear this, because I think the temptation is to teach the role of the criminal justice is a bullet point on the spec for crime and deviance from a very Marxist or new right perspective, and that whole section can be easily missed or glossed over, or I would say missed actually. Well, I mean, I can't speak for every teacher, but me personally, yeah, definitely. Until I've read your research and spoken to you, it's easily something to be missed because of the way that we teach it. And so it's really important to see that. And like you mentioned it before, it's like a sort of a pillar of the welfare state, which is really interesting imagery, really, because we often think of it as the NHS. We think of police, we think of teachers, we think of social workers. We might think of probation officers within that, but we don't think of the role of solicitors and lawyering, as you said. Obviously, your research was qualitative research, and it was about you getting in there and really feeling it. And I appreciate that, is particularly with legal aid. It's a really sensitive, confidential sector. How do you get access to that, and how do you maintain, like, what are the challenges involved of doing qualitative research in such a sensitive, traumatic environment? Or, I mean, I'm putting those labels, it might not be sensitive and traumatic, but I'd imagine it, anyone that's having to deal with legal aid, it's not going to be for pleasant reasons.
Absolutely. So I've always been a qualitative researcher. Throughout my studies, quants always gave me that kind of shuddering feeling. I was like, oh, okay, numbers, statistics. However, I must stress at that point, it's ever so important to get that all-rounded, grounded approach to social research, because it allows you to do and apply your skills going forward. So I'm so glad I have done training in kind of an all-rounded way, in an all-rounded sense. But for me, it's more about the meaning. It's not so much about having numbers to demonstrate big trends and that funding's going up and down and we have more demand and more cases, etc., etc. What that doesn't do is tell the story. And I think, like you say, in an area that's depleting and struggling to stay afloat, numbers are not really going to help us. We know numbers are bad. We know the pressure is bad and the pressure is intense. But actually, it's the stories and the access. That was something I was really worried about as a researcher. For any researcher, it's difficult to enter a field. One, if you're already part of a given community or field, then you might feel like that you've got bias and that you already know too much and you're already too much of an insider. But coming from an outsider perspective, like I'm not a trained lawyer, I haven't done a law degree, I'm coming from a social science background, going in as a researcher, I felt kind of different challenges. So would I have the knowledge to be able to navigate the environments that I were placed in? Would I have, for example, the communication skills to deal with the clients who are in incredibly needy situations, facing potential homelessness, loss of custody of children, been through, all different kinds of traumas and backgrounds. Having that ability to sit in a room and kind of hear all of that is also very, very difficult if you're not used to that. So I think as a researcher, it's very much about adapting, but also, embracing it. So I could just enter a court space and sit back and, feel a bit like I'm in the way, I'm a bit of an intruder, and sort of avoid contact with anyone. But what are you going to get out of that? You're not going to get the rich insight. The aim of sort of ethnographic research is to immerse oneself as much as possible. So it is about chatting to people. It is about taking as many notes or as many mental notes as you can, because obviously not all situations you can have a pen and paper out or a laptop. So it's having that ability to connect with the environment and to remember what you've seen, about what you see, what you hear, what's the physical structures, what's the space like, what are the interactions like, what are they wearing? It is absolutely everything. So for me, it's a very kind of enjoyable method of research, because one, I am a very nosy person in general, always have been. But also it's just understanding the way of being and living. So at the end of the day, the way that I kind of justified it to myself, because originally I thought, I'm really not part of the furniture here. I'm in the way. Like, should I be offering to make tea? Should I be doing the photocopying? Like, do I need to give something back? But then I'm not an intern. I'm not, so it's that really, but I think the key thing there is we all go through that. No one walks into a space with an air of confidence thinking, you know what, I'm going to rule this space and I'm going to, really take over and all those different kinds of things. I'm so sorry. Arnie agreed with that, if you heard that part. But actually, yeah, it's navigating a space. And I think just building up those connections and also jumping in, but not being too over the top, like knowing that these individuals have got endless demands, endless clients waiting for them. I mean, one day I was sat in the duty court, and I think this housing solicitor, I think we must have seen about 20, 25 clients in and out like a conveyor belt. And some of them were literally on the end of, like, risking their whole lives in terms of, one day they have a house, the next day they don't, like potential homelessness, disrepair, mold issues, damp issues. And so it's just being aware of that and being mindful that actually, yes, I'm a researcher, but me sitting and listening and being is much more important, and also understanding of the client's needs. So I didn't go in like asking loads of questions and all these different kinds of things. I kind of waited for the right time for that. So it's absolutely a journey. Every researcher goes on a journey, and every researcher is ultimately human, but every participant is ultimately human. So it's just understanding how to bridge that gap. And also this idea of sort of imposter syndrome. So I also was really lucky to contribute to a textbook a few years ago now, right at the beginning of my research. And in criminology, for example, and sociology, we often have this idea of studying down, right? So criminologists typically work with gangs, groups of offenders, particular victims, particular perpetrators of crime, prisoners. So these groups of people, and it's this idea of studying down, right? So you've got a researcher title, a label, and you're looking down into these communities. Similar if you think about, for example, lower social classes, the underclass, all these different kinds of things. So it's seen as like a privilege, and it's kind of this power imbalance. But I wrote a little section in one of the textbooks on studying up. So what happens when you're a researcher and you're looking up into a professional field that requires specific education or training qualifications, when that researcher doesn't have those particular qualifications. So that's a really interesting concept as a researcher. Yes, we can study down and look at groups of people that society label as being beneath certain groups and beneath certain individuals, which I don't agree with at all anyway. But this term studying up, I think, is so important, because what about the elites? What about the powerful? What about white collar? What about professions? And yeah, I think that's really important. How does, professional agency get in the way of researching certain populations? But actually, if you had the skill sets and if you had the professional qualifications, you would not get the same view as if you're going in fresh-faced into the field. And that, it takes getting used to. You need confidence, and everyone gets nervous and all these different kinds of things. But being like a fly on the wall, quite literally, you see so much, and your professional knowledge doesn't get in the way of that.
Yeah, your biases. So how long did you spend doing your sort of second bit of ethnographic research from your most recent book?
So that was sort of stemmed from the PhD research. So that was
Mm.
kind of year in the field, and then since then there's been sort of continuous interviews and things like that. But that largely stemmed from the same, year in the field, because essentially the book sort of used the PhD to as its basis. Um, but yeah, I just feel like as well, there's never an end to research.
Mm.
I think we probably all face.
I feel
But
like a
like,
golden thread, isn't it? The more you find, the more, I suppose it's like saying ignorance is bliss, but then once you open the can of worms as
absolutely.
such, there's more and more to find.
And
Um,
it's, yeah, and the research participants also were so grateful. They were like, finally, someone to give us a voice, or
mm.
to give real life insight rather than all these stereotypes and headlines, etc., which aren't necessarily accurate. So I was really surprised by that. It was really kind of lovely to hear that.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think for me, and I hope that other teachers who are listening to this podcast will read your read your research and look at things outside the spec. You know, the spec is just a
Absolutely,
list of bullet points, and actually, those bullet points can be explored. And actually, it's a responsibility of us as sociology teachers to create that critical thinking. It's important to speak to new researchers like yourself, because otherwise, I mean, I have actually got Harold Lambos. Nothing against Harold Lambos. It's over there. I don't use it. My students. It's my A level book from when I was a student a very long time ago in the 90s. But you know, we are to some extent the temptation is still use the old sort of classical studies, which obviously they're important. They give that foundation, but actually
absolutely.
it's looking at a contemporary lens like you're doing, and also giving that meaning to situations which we don't necessarily know a lot about unless we look into them.
Of
In
course, yeah,
regards to us giving students advice, like we're a stepping stone from, I suppose, GCSE into degree or into work, obviously with the premise that some students will go off either to do sociology or criminology or social policy along them lines. Is there anything that we as teachers should be doing in order to prepare our students for maybe like going to the University of Kent, like where you work, or to another similar prestigious university? Is there something that you finding that we're not doing, that when you get our A level students, they're lacking in that skill potentially, and is there anything we can do to support that journey through into academia?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't say. I mean, obviously, teaching at A level is difficult because you have the curriculum, and you have the spec, etc., and there's certain knowledge you have to teach. Um, But I really think that encouraging your students to think outside of the box and introducing them to case studies and different ideas that maybe go against the grain, I think is so, so important. But also encouraging your students to look at the news and to look at what's going on. Because I find that a lot of my first year students have very much lived in a bubble. And you'll mention like key crimes that have occurred or case studies, and they'll just be, blank looks on the face and think, okay, well, what happened? I don't know anything about that. Lots of students come with knowledge from the media. We can't really avoid that. Loads of students, particularly in first year, will mention Netflix documentaries and TV shows and films and things like that. And actually, there is a space for that. The media is such an important part of social sciences, and understanding things through that kind of media lens is very important. So, it's not to dismiss that. And I always say that to my students. I was like, even if you're watching something, whether it be non-fiction, fiction, there might be something within that that speaks to what we're talking about. So the way that I teach as a lecturer is that I very much apply the knowledge. So rather than, sticking to just books and heavy theory and things like that, I always like to start with reality. So what's going on around us? Has something happened in the news recently? So recently we've had the early prison release scheme. We've had the increase in school shootings whereby the parents were given responsibility and punished accordingly. Every day there's something going on. And I always encourage the students to think through the lens of current affairs, news stories, real life, because ultimately, as social scientists, we can contribute to change, and we can contribute to practice in the real world, whether that be through being a police officer or a probation worker or a researcher. Ultimately, you're contributing to knowledge. And I think what's really good in terms of social sciences is that it does give that detail. So it gives the detail as to why and how things happen. And quite often the law just says kind of what it is outright. Forensics quite often is based on fact, so that's kind of right or wrong. It's very much about the what. But criminologist, sociologist, it's asking the why, it's asking questions. And I think teachers who encourage their students to ask those questions and to think critically and to also think about the human side of things is so important, because ultimately all these systems that we talk about are just human driven, human centered. And so that's why, again, my research, I do look at the macro structures. So I do look at government, I look at policy, look at funding, because you can't really do so without fitting it into the broader context. But I also look at the sort of meso level, so the working culture, the shared practice. But very much so, I focus on the individual level, so the micro practice. What is someone's everyday actions? Why do they do what they do? What are their opinions of the particular area that you're looking at? How do they function in a given environment? So it's thinking about all those different levels. And I really love using that macro, meso, micro insight or framework, because all of a sudden you just see like students' eyes light up and you think, oh, okay, yeah, so it isn't just about austerity. What does that look like in terms of court systems? What does that look like in terms of the user of the court systems from the occupational perspective or the user perspective? So, yeah, broadening things out, but also thinking about different perspectives. I said,
Yeah, because we often obviously use the word structure and action, but actually that evaluational tool, like, I haven't, I've used it myself for my own sort of work, like
yeah,
whenever I've done some research, and I did a, I like learning, so I did another qualification in the holidays, another
amazing.
PhD, but yeah, just why not? Why not with
Yeah,
two
why not?
children and a house and a full-time job? Let's just do another
Yeah, no
post-graduate
worries. Throw it in.
diploma. You can just throw that in, add that in.
Yeah,
But I use that as my analysis tool, but I didn't think as my evaluational tool. And but actually, those sort of tools that you use at sort of degree level or postgraduate level, that you can actually share those with your students.
yeah,
Um, in a soft way, because obviously you don't want to like scare them, but
of
ultimately
course.
we often use like scale for evaluation, which is like a strength, criticism,
Yeah,
alternative view, etc. But actually those sort of undergraduate tools are also useful as well. And maybe I'm just thinking, I'm not saying to all teachers do that, maybe something trial with maybe a lesson or with an
yeah,
individual group of
absolutely.
students, something like that, and see how they get on with it. I'm actually going to do that. I'm gonna do that this week. I'm
Yeah,
gonna get my template out
yeah.
and share
Just, I
that.
think some students really appreciate like having a framework.
Mm,
So like, or just literally putting it into layman's terms. So how do you think that looks from the perspective of an individual, or how do you think that would make you feel?
mm,
You know,
yeah.
it can be really basic. I've just said it
Mm,
as macro as a micro, which may sound fancy, but the
mm.
reality it's not
Yeah.
particularly.
Well, it is. It's like structure, action, structure. Like it's like basically, what does it
Yeah,
make you feel? Why does policy level, and then what does it mean? Sort of
yeah.
like in society. But yeah, I
Look,
think these are good. Yeah,
structure,
definitely.
society and community and individual. That's
Mm,
literally
that's it.
it adds so much more depth, and also it encourages
Mm,
to think about things from a practitioner perspective, which often we don't do.
mm,
Think about the user or the offender or the victim.
mm.
Think
Yeah,
about
definitely.
working within that.
Yeah, that's a. I don't think I actually. I'm sure that maybe other teachers are doing it, and I've just missed a trick here, and I haven't done it at all. So that's really useful, and I think it is good to start with. I must admit, I do always start with, how does this affect you on the daily? Like, what does that look
Yeah,
like for you? How's that
yeah,
feel? Because I always start with, I'm a 45-year-old woman. Like how that has an experience for me is going to be
yeah,
very different from how it is as an experience for you, and their experience will be very different. Particularly, like for argument's sake, using the media straight away, like social media
yeah.
is used very
Absolutely.
differently. So, but it's such a useful tool. And I know you're doing some great work at the University of Kent. I know you do lots of outreach work as well.
Yeah,
Your ears will be burning. The other day, I was talking to a fellow colleague that lives in Kent, and she said that you do a lot of
yes,
outreach
yeah.
work
I
with
I
her
know.
school as well. So yeah, so doing some great things. Definitely, you're also part of that heart that you've mentioned. You know that a lot of your research is motivated for making positive change. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Can you just name check your book again for anyone that wants to check it out?
I feel bad. Like I it's really bad. I've written this book, and then when people are like, "What's the title?" I'm like, "Don't worry, don't worry. You don't worry." But no, it's The Hidden World of the Legal Aid Lawyer,
And
revealing
it's
the
got
heart.
a spangly book cover, hasn't it? It's multicoloured,
Yeah,
like little.
yeah, it's like bright, colourful. Technically, it's out sort of end of April, May, so it's going through its final checks. But
But you
yeah,
can reserve it on Amazon if you wanted to, because I have checked that out. So you
yeah, you
can
can
reserve it.
do. And the Kindle version is definitely a lot cheaper.
Well, I was going to say that. I was going to say for our poor teachers out there, the Kindle version is considerably cheaper. So
It's
there we
crazy
go.
how much they price these books at. But I guess the idea is that libraries purchase sort of hard copies, and then other people, like individuals, do sort of the online copies. But yeah, I do feel I had no control over that. So yeah, I did feel bad when I saw the price.
Honestly, at the end of the day, it is what it is. But yeah, definitely. I mean, it's worth checking it out. So, and also your journal articles as well. So there's lots out there. So
Yeah,
thank you
yeah,
ever so much
absolutely.
for your time. I really, really appreciate it, and particularly your story that you mentioned at the beginning about how I think that's a really good sort of true story to tell to our students of how it's not always the path you think it's going to be. So that's really important as well, and how that actually ends up being
Absolutely.
positive. So thank you ever so much for your time, and have a lovely day. And thank you to your
Okay,
dog as well.
thank you. Thank you. Honestly, I really enjoyed it. I love speaking to students. I love speaking of all ages, school, college, university, and just, yeah, seeing how social sciences can have a positive impact. And it's not all theory, and it's not all heavy books, and it's not, it's the application of it. And I think we need to stop and think a lot of the time. I think actually, as social scientists, we can have a very significant role. And I think that's just a really nice thing to think about. It's not all doom and gloom, despite what everything says. Um, and yeah, we have that ability to bring to light hidden populations and communities. So yeah,
Yeah.
we need to use that.
Oh, thank you ever so much, and you take care. Have a lovely day.
Okay, thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Bye bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.